start recording. And so I'm gonna open up one of the pages that I posted earlier, which is the Godot documentation for tile maps as well. So this has some good information about how to set up your tile maps in a few different contexts. And it talks about the auto tiles here. It kind of explains how the auto tiles work. And they're a little confusing, which is why I'm going to go over like a really overly simplified version of the auto tile. And then we're going to use one of these templates. So there's a few different templates that you can use, and it makes it much easier than trying to design it from scratch. So I'm going to do it really rough and quick, so we don't have to spend a lot of time, but I'll go over the basic principle, and then you guys can work on it from there. And there's a few different options in the way that it kind of describes things here. And so let's talk about that real quick. This first one, this generic template, it says this template can be used for sideways or fully top-down perspectives. And so that kind of depends on what you want the art to look like. You can do it either way, or there's rather lots of options that you can use. I'm going to open up my pen tool real quick, and let's do a little drawing. So for this 2x2 tile map, I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to use the 3x3 because this one is a little bit limited. You have to have all of your tiles have to be at least 2 units long, but that's okay. It could be really useful. But it says this template can be used for sideways or fully top-down perspective. So I think that's pretty clear, but just in terms of explaining what that means. So a top-down perspective would be like if our game, like if we imagine that we were making a game like chess and we had a grid and we were just looking down directly at the chessboard. So our chess, pieces wouldn't look like this. They would just look like a circle. So that would be top down. We're looking directly down at our game area. Sideways is if, our chessboard is here and we have our pieces like this. And our view, like if we imagine we have like a little camera over here, this is our view. And so it's fully 2D. So there's no like depth to it necessarily. You could have like layers and stuff like that. But what we're seeing is just the 2D side. So that's our side scroller perspective. So for this version, you'll see how these templates convert to like our actual tiles. But this version is good if you have like a simple setup where, you just have like either a map that you're walking around from a top-down perspective, or if you have a side scroller, like if you have, platforms that fit together like that and your players jumping along on the platforms. So that's one sort of like style that you might be working in. And it kind of depends what you want to do for the art for this. It's up to you guys. And then if we scroll down a bit, this more complex template also says template can be used for sideways or fully top-down perspectives. Okay. So then it has some templates for more complex perspectives. So top-down, floor, and 3/4 perspective. So for this one, if we imagine, use this. So if we imagine our chessboard with our chess pieces here, this is pretty bad drawing, but that's okay. So for a 3/4 perspective, our camera is up here. And we're looking down at an angle, a 3/4 angle. And so we can see, like, for example, if we have like, we don't have walls in chess, but let's imagine instead like a regular game. And this is kind of like the floor. And maybe there's like a wall here. Maybe it's like a maze or something like that. So we would be able to see part of the wall And so we'd see like a little bit of the top of the wall, a little bit of the side of the wall, and on the character, we'd see like the side of the character. So this one uses a few more colors in order to represent that. So instead of just having like our terrain, we have levels to the terrain. And so in these maps down here, it uses green for the floor, cyan for the walls, yellows for the top of the walls. So depending on what art style you want to use, you may want to use different versions of these tile maps. And you'll see as we start to put these in, you might have to use multiple tile maps to get the exact look you want. But you can start with something simple and then build on it. And we could go over the best way to approach it. So let's make a really, really simple auto tile, like stupidly simple. And then we're going to use one of the templates next. So I'm going to go to Pascal and I'm going to make something just like really, really simple. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But we're going to start with a simple auto tile. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to start by saving this. And so I'm going to save as, and I'm already in my tilesets folder, but if I wasn't, I would go to the desktop, go to MMP 270, go to art, and go to tilesets. And so this is where I want to save my Pascal file, the file that I can edit. And I'm going to name this one simple, or I'll call this auto, or I guess I want to start with tiles auto simple. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my grid first to make this a little bit easier to see. And I'm going to do 64 by 64. And so then I'm going to go to the size, and my canvas is 32 by 32, but I want to make this a little bit larger. So I want to work with 64 by 64 tiles, but I also want to have a little bit of space around my tile. So I'm going to turn off the maintain aspect ratio, and I'm going to make the width like 3 times more. So I'll just do that math real quick. 3 times 64 is 192. I'm going to make this 192. And so now I can see my 3 tiles. For some reason my grid is green. Let's make it white. And so for this auto tile, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a tile in the center with some edges. And when we put it into Godot, Godot is going to figure out how to make different tiles that are as long as, as I draw them. And it's going to repeat the center tile, and then it's going to use the edges for the edges. So it's going to be very simple. This would be more for like a side scroller platformer type thing, but it'll be an easy way to kind of show this example. So I'm going to start really simple. I'm just going to get a rectangle, and I'm going to do some dirt and some grass, just pretty typical default for something like this. So let me do the dirt first, actually. I'll get some brown color, and I'll make a rectangle that's a little bit wider than the middle tile and fill that in. And then I'm going to use the pen tool. I'll use a little bit of a wider pen just to save time. And I'm going to get a green color for my grass and just kind of fill in the top of my tile. And so you'll see a lot of tutorials that kind of use a similar style. So I'm just kind of going with like a generic grass and dirt tile here. And so that's pretty simple, pretty basic. And what I'm going to do again is I'm going to repeat this middle tile, and then I'm going to use the edge tile. So I'm going to I'm going to take my eraser and kind of erase the edges a little bit and kind of round it off just so it looks more like a little corner here. And I might take out the bottom a little bit just to add some edges in there. And so I don't really care that much about the sides. These are just kind of to cap off the tile. I might even take out a little bit of the grass at the top just to add some more detail. So this looks pretty good. I could spend more time on this, obviously, but I don't want to waste too much time on the demo. I'm just going to add some little details as usual, just to kind of add a bit here. So I'll just add few dots here, and a few little dirt specks here, just so we can see some detail. Okay, that doesn't look that great, but I did it very quickly, and we're just going to use it for a demo. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go to export. I'm going to export a PNG and put it in my game folder. So I'm already in my game, so I can just save it directly here. But again, if I wasn't here, I would go to my desktop, go to MMP 270, go to my game, go to sprites, and then save the PNG that I exported here. Okay, so here's my simple auto tile. And so now I'm going to open up Godot. So I'll open up my project folder and open Godot. And I'm going to go to my scenes, and let's use my tile scene. Well, actually, let's start from a new scene. So I'm going to go to my default scene, and I'll duplicate this one. So you don't need to do this. I'm just doing this so I'm not putting stuff on top of each other. So I'm going to call this auto tile simple. And so I'm gonna make basically like the most default, like simple auto tile you could possibly make. This might be useful if you're creating like a really simple platformer, but it doesn't really do much other than this one pretty specific thing. So, you know, this is just to kind of show exactly what the auto tile system actually does. So I'm gonna change the name of this to auto tile simple. And again, I'm going to add a child node. This is going to be a tile map again. And I'll put this up here. And like last time, to create the tile set, first I want to make sure that my cell size is right. And that looks good, 64 by 64. And so then I can click on the tile set empty and click new tile set. And then click on that new tile set to open the tile set editor. And now I just want to add my image in here. So I'm going to open the sprites in the file system and drag in my simple tile set. And so remember, I need to create a tile before I can set my settings. So I'm going to use an auto tile for this one and turn on the grid. And the grid doesn't really match what I created in my art. So I still have to make a tile, but then I'm going to delete it. So I'm just going to draw a tile here. But then I'm going to go to snap options, and the default is 32 by 32, but my art is 64 by 64. So I'm going to change that. And then I'm going to delete this region. And now I see the grid matches my art. I'm going to create a new auto tile and select my 3 tiles. And so the thing that the auto tile does that's different from the basic tile is it's going to use the Bitmask that we create to decide where to put the tiles. And so it's a little confusing, but I'll show you guys how this works. So I'm going to change the name of the tile first. I'm just going to call this auto tile. And we're going to change the auto tile Bitmask mode. So it's set to 2 by 2, which is what we would use if we were using this 2 by 2 template. But we're going to be using a 3 by 3 template. And for this example, this is a 3 by 3. So I'm going to change this to 3 by 3. And then when I go to Bitmask, you'll see if I click inside the tile, it's going to add a red dot or remove if I right click. And what that Bitmask does, it's kind of confusing, but it describes to Godot how the tiles fit together. And so for each square inside my tile grid, the middle bit refers to the that tile, and then the sides tell the Bitmask what it can connect to. So if I put 2 bits here, it'll say that this can connect here. And if I took 2 bits here, it'll say that the middle can connect to the right. And so this is like the most kind of like really basic, simple tile that you can create. I'll show you guys how this works. I'm also going to choose the icon. Since there's multiple tiles, I want to put in the middle icon. So now I'm going to draw a little bit with this. I'm going to click on my tile map again, and you can see there's my tile. And let's go to the cell and make sure, yeah, we already changed it to 64 by 64. So if I put one tile, I just get my middle tile. But if I put 3 tiles, you can see I get my sides. And if I put like a bunch of tiles, then it repeats the middle tile and it puts the sides on the side. So if I want to create a 2D platformer, this is a really good way to make single sort of height tiles and, you know, create a bunch of platforms really quickly. I can just draw across and it just draws them for me. I can't really do anything else. So if I try to draw more tiles like this, it gets confused and it doesn't know what to do because I haven't really described more possibilities except for just drawing in a straight line. So it's a bit limited, but if you just want some platforms like this and you don't want to spend a lot of time, you know, working with a auto tile template, this is an easy way to set things up. So for the scene that we're working on, these tiles don't really make sense because our player isn't, you know, falling. We haven't added gravity yet. So this would be more for a 2D scene. If you wanted to have something like that, I could actually, let me see if I have my player controller script. This is the one that we're working on. So let me grab the one that I have in my assets folder just to show what that would look like real quick. So I'll go to MMP 270, go to assets, go to scripts. Here's the player controller. I'm going to rename this so I don't conflict with the other one. So I'll just call this assets. I'll copy that and put it in my game. Okay. So then if I switch the script there, so I'll choose my player and I'll load a script, go to scripts, player controller assets, open. I think the player will jump. Oh, and he falls through because I don't have a collider. Okay, so one more thing that we need to add to our tile set is a collider. So I'll go back to my tile map, choose my auto tile and click on the tile set. I'll choose this tile. And then one thing that's tricky in terms of editing this is to get the tile that I already created, I can click on these arrows to cycle through the tiles that already exist. So these 2 little arrows that come up next to the edit once I select the tile. And so I forgot to add a collision. So I can go back to my region and select the middle tile and then go to collision and then add in just this box. I'll just click on that box and then click right here and it fills it in. I have the grid turned on so it kind of fills up to the top. That might look weird because the player may be standing a little bit on top, but I think it'll be okay just for this demo. So I'm going to save that. And so now that little blue area, the player is going to collide with that blue area, but the player will also fall through the other areas. So I'll go back to my scene. Oh, it looks like I broke my tile map. How did I do that? Let's go back here and choose the tile map. And it looks like I undid my Bitmask somehow. So let's just select this, go to the Bitmask. Oops. So yeah, the tile editor can be a little confusing. So let's see. Okay, here's our auto tile. All right, I think I'm just gonna delete this and start over. Let's see, I'm just gonna delete these and start from scratch. Okay, so I'm gonna create my auto tile. So that looks good. I'm gonna add a collision here. Okay, I'm gonna add in my Bitmask. So let's make it 3x3 minimal and draw across. And let's change our icon and save and go back here. There we go. Okay. So yeah, the tile editor can be a little frustrating to use, but you can get it to work eventually. So there's my character. So I can jump with this other character controller, although I can't jump very high. So let's give me a little bit more jump ability. Okay, so now I can jump nice and high, although I'm very slow. And so now I can jump on these tiles. So this is good for a 2D side scroller. For a more sort of like RPG style map, we're going to want to use our more sophisticated auto tile system. So we'll do that next. Yeah, that's what we can use the auto tile for. Okay, so I'm going to leave this as is, and then go back to Pascal and make a new tile. So I'll click on the plus and create a new sprite and start my new 3x3. I'll make this a bit bigger. Any questions before I do the next one?
Makes sense so far.
Okay, cool. All right, so for this one, there's a bunch of different ways that we could approach this, but I'm gonna do it in the simplest way that I know how, which is to just yank this template from the Godot website and then draw on top of it. There's better ways to do it, and there's also tools that will help you do it. One tool is Tilesetter. This was something that a student from last semester discovered and used for his project, and it'll kind of just like generate your tile set for you based on some simple artwork. So that's an option. I think it's free. I don't remember. Okay, so it's free for the simple version. If you want more complicated version, you can buy it. So that's a good thing to use if you want to have this process automated a little bit. I'll post that in the class channel. But what I'm going to do is just grab this and just draw on top of it. So I'll open up my art folder. So I'll go back to MMP 270, go to art, and go to tile sets. And I'm just going to drag this in there. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do on Mac or PC. You can also right click and click save image as, and it'll let you save the image wherever you want. And so then I'm going to go back to Pascal and I'm going to import, go to browse images, and it's already open to my tile sets folder. So I'll just click on that and click open. And then it's saying, do I want to do a single image? Do I want to do a sprite sheet? So I could convert it into a sprite sheet. That might make it easier to edit. I could do like a sprite sheet, and I could do like, I think it's probably 64 by 64. Let's see. Won't let me. Is it 64 by 64? Yes, it is 64 by 64. But I'm actually just going to do it as a single image and just draw on top of it. So I'm going to click import. So there's a lot of different ways that you could do this. You might want to, import it as sprites and look at each one of these individually. But we can see based on the purple grid. So we're actually seeing our grid and the purple grid at the same time. If I go up here and turn off the grid, you can see they have their own purple grid to show the different tiles, and it matches our grid. So that's good. We know it's 64 by 64, even though obviously this individual frame is much bigger. And so what I could do, there's a couple ways I could do this. One way is I could actually make a new layer, and I could, draw on top, which that would make sense to do it that way. I could also make like one piece of art and then copy and paste it into different places. If I have like a water texture and a grass texture or something like that. So there's different ways to do it. I'm zooming in and out, by the way, using the scroll wheel. And if you click on the middle mouse button on the scroll wheel, you can also pan to move, but you can also, the move tool actually will move the art. So we don't want to do that. So yeah, another thing that I can do if I really want to do this very fast is just use my Paint All Pixels tool. So that, since we have these colors already built into the template, that's going to make it really easy for me, if I know the sort of base colors that I want to use, to just like replace the art with my own colors immediately. I'm going to actually turn off the grid for now. I don't need that. And so for this example, I'm going to do like some grass areas and some water areas. So what I'll do is paint all pixels. And for the way these tile sets work, the red part or pink part is where the character can walk, and the white part is where the character shouldn't be able to walk. So I'm going to get like a green for some grass, and I'm just going to do paint all pixels and paint everything that is pink to green. And then I'll do the same thing with the white. I'll get a blue color for my water and do that. And then I have these annoying purple grid lines. I could actually use Godot to get rid of those with a little bit of an offset. But I kind of want to just paint on stuff. I don't want to really worry about the grid too much. So I'm just going to paint these in and then I'll add them in later. So this may be a little rough as I draw this, but when we put it in Godot, this is just a demo, so you'll see how this works. So you can see there's a lot of different data here, and this basically just covers all of the different ways tiles in our tile set could fit together. And so what we want to do is draw a little bit of a border or transition between the parts of our tile set. So I'm just going to do this really simply. I'm just going to get like a darker green color. You could also do like a dirt color. You could do a lot of different stuff just to show kind of the transition between the ground and the water. So I could do like this dark green around the edges so we can see kind of the borders there. And this is kind of the difference between like this top down or side scroller versus the 3/4 is if I was doing 3/4, I would want to show a little depth. So I might want to put like some wall here and up here to kind of show some depth. But I'm just going to focus on doing the top down or side scroller. So I'm not going to worry about that. And then I want to switch to the other green color and fill in these little water gaps. So this is a basic idea. I can create a little bit more of a sophisticated look by creating these boundaries in the work. But I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm not going to do like a ton of detail here. So just for the sake of the demo. So I'm going to just draw an outline around this little dot here. And go up here and draw this outline around the outside. And so this is for like corners that have just one tile. And we'll see Godot is going to just do all of this work for us once we get this artwork done. So then I'm just going to draw here. And if you have different ideas for how this looks, you could also, one good thing to do is just Google tile sets or Godot tile sets, and you'll see a lot of examples of different types of tile sets and different effects that people can get by using them. And then of course I need to get rid of these guys, although I can just use the paint bucket to do it a little faster.
Can you import an image, Professor?
What?
Can you import an image?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what do you, that's how I started. I used the import and went to browse images and chose the Autotile template.
Sorry, I got here late. Okay.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
And the acceptable file formats?
That's a good question. I think it's, let's see. So it says it takes PNG, JPEG, BMP, or animated GIF.
Cool. And what's the size range you can do on it? Do you want to go like ultra compact? You said Godot can run slow on certain things.
So this one is 64 by 64 for each tile, which I think is like a good size range for this type of thing, but you can go larger and you can go smaller. It depends on what kind of art you're working with and what the style of the game is.
Right on. Thank you, Professor.
Yep. All right, so in this section, I'm still just doing this little green outline. And for this one, I guess the green doesn't really make that much sense. I should have done like a beach thing. Maybe I can replace the color in a second. Anyway, for this one, these are tiles that have a little bit more, there might be two tiles next to each other or a wider version of the tiles. And so you could draw a little detail in here. So once I do the kind of borders or outlines here, you can see these middle tiles have a little more space. So that might be a good place to put like a little bit of detail, like some more grass or maybe some flowers or something like that, because you'll have a little bit more room. And if you put a bunch of tiles like in a big area, you're going to see, you know, these ones repeated. So maybe I'll put a little detail in here. I'll put a couple flowers just to give it something else going on. Like in this scene, I'll put some little flowers around here. Okay, and then I'm gonna fill in these blue water areas. All right, and we just have one more area. So you can see there's one tile that's just completely grass. And so any large area that is just grass is really just going to be this middle tile repeated. And then a few other tiles to fill in different gaps depending on what shapes you're drawing. So let's add in our last outline. And there's different versions of this template as well. If you Google this, you'll see that other people have these arranged in different ways. Some people don't have every single last little bit, because if you don't need, for example, like a single line of tiles, you may not need to have as much detail covered as this default has. And there's also even more complicated tile structures to do things like add circles in the design or diagonals and things like that. So I forget how many tiles are in this tile map. I think it's like 40 or 50 or something like that. But there's another even more complex tile map that we're not going to look at today, but that has like 200 something different types of tiles. So that would obviously take a lot more time. So let's fill in our water here. Oops. And I'm not going to spend a ton more time here just because I want to move on with the demo. But you could add some detail in here. You could use the lighten tool to add some different types of grass. You could add the darken tool, do different things like that. And yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter that much. I just want to see what it looks like if I replace the dark green with like a dirt color. See how that looks. Yeah, it looks okay. Maybe we'll do a little lighter. It looks okay. It's kind of washed out. It's very easy to change that, so I'm just going to leave this as is. Whoops, I forgot to save this. So let's save this as Autotile 3x3. So we'll save that, and now I'm going to export my sprite sheet. This one is much bigger, but it's still pretty small relative to images in the world. So I'm going to save this as let's put tiles at the beginning so it'll be organized. So this is tiles auto 3x3 and click save. Okay, so I've got my auto tile. I'm going to leave this here in case I want to edit it, and I'm going to go back to Godot, and I'll make another scene. I'm going to get rid of this scene. I have my default scene. And so let's duplicate this again. And I'm going to say auto tile 3x3 scene. So I'll open that up and rename this auto 3x3. Okay. So I'll add in a tile map again. Most of this process is pretty much the same. So I'll add in another tile map. I'm going to drag it up a little bit. And I'm going to make sure the cell size is correct. That's 64 by 64. Okay. Oh, and I forgot I want to put it on the right collision layer. So this is on the tiles collision layer, not the player layer. But we're masking for the player, which is good. So I'm just going to leave that as is. And I'll go to my new tile set, click on the tile set, And now I just have to drag in my auto tiles. So that's right here. Click on this. I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit. And I'll click new auto tile and I'll just grab this whole section. And we can see that it's off, so we need to reset this and then do it over. So I'm gonna go to my subtile size and do 64 by 64. Okay, so then that looks right. So let's delete this, do new auto tile again, turn on the snapping. So now it matches. And so I'm just gonna select every single tile. And let's see. Oh, it changed it back to 32 by 32. So try that one more time, 64 by 64. And let's delete it and grab it again. There we go. So this is actually, there's too many squares in the last one. Okay, so now we've got our whole grid. And so now the bitmask is pretty easy for this one. We just go to the bitmask and we're gonna go to 3 by 3 minimal. And so remember, anywhere that's green is where our player can walk, but it also serves to show us where the grass connects. And so we can just draw our bitmask directly on top of our design. Anywhere there's green, we want to do the bitmask. So at this point, you can probably see why I'm using this template, because it's actually quite a complicated process. And if you get one of these off, you're gonna see glitchy, weird results when you actually try to draw your tiles. And so to avoid that, we're just gonna use this basic template. And it's gonna allow us to do some pretty cool stuff without really having to understand that much of what we're doing. So I'm just gonna fill in all these little bits. And then I'm gonna go to the icon and I'm gonna choose this little single tile as an icon. And I'm also gonna set that as the priority tile, although I maybe should set it as this one. Either one, it doesn't really matter that much. And then we wanna set up some collisions. This process is a little bit more time consuming, so I may not do the whole thing right now. But for example, if we don't want our player to walk on the water, we're gonna need to set up some collisions. And right now, we can't make a collision that matches exactly what the art looks like. So if I try to draw a box here, it's gonna cover this whole thing. So we don't wanna do that. I'm gonna delete this collision. And so I'm gonna change this step to like 16 by 16, something much smaller. So that'll give me more options. And then I can use my polygon to draw my collision like this. I'm just gonna draw around the water. So that process is gonna take me a bit longer. If I go to my next tab, I can draw another polygon. I can actually just do a square here because it's just this. I'll add another square.
And you're essentially just creating a boundary, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly. So anywhere I add this collision, it's not gonna let my player walk there. So I can actually just use this square for this.
Hey, Professor?
Yeah.
Do you remember not Super Mario, but the original Mario Brothers, where they could walk through one side and pop out on the other, or like with Pac-Man, where you could go through the side tunnel and out on the other?
Mm-hmm.
How would you arrange that as opposed to just having a barrier? Have your character go through and appear on the other end?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are gonna we're gonna do that in a little while. That's called using a portal. And so if it's not like the game portal, but the game portal does obviously use portals. But a portal is in a game is like what you're talking about when you go over an area that transports you to another area, and that's in our skill tree. Let's see. It's I guess it's checkpoints and portals. So that's something that we'll do the art for, and then I think it's also in our level design. So that's something that we'll add a little bit later in the semester. It's not exactly the same thing as using a collider, but that's a good question.
Thank you.
So one thing to mention as I'm adding these collisions, so I added a few different boxes and I want to edit this little box over here, but I can't select it with my mouse. It's a little annoying. I have to use these arrows to move and select, and then I can move this box and then it goes back here. So it's a little frustrating, but eventually I can add in these colliders. So I'm not going to do this whole thing right now because it would be kind of boring for you guys to watch, but I would want to fill in all of the water with these colliders. But for now, I'm just going to go click on my tile map and I'm going to draw some tiles. So I have my tiles here. Oh, I forgot to name it. The name doesn't really matter that much, but it just makes it easier to see. So this is my auto tile. I'll go back to the tile map. So if I add one tile, it's just going to have this like little piece of ground. But if I add another tile, it's going to fit them together. Oh, and I have like a little edge here. So I went a little too far with one of my edges. Let me see if I can see where that is. Let's turn on the grid. Oh, it's right here maybe. Or no, it's right, maybe it's right here. I don't know, it's one of these. I went over, I should have had the grid lines on when I was drawing this. So I want to avoid going over the grid lines because that's when I get those little issues like that. But I'm not going to fix that right now. It would be pretty easy. Or actually, why don't I just go ahead and fix it? So I'm just going to grab my pen tool, get the water, and just get rid of this. Okay. And then I have some up here as well. Just clean that up. Clean this one up. And I'll probably need to clean this up. So yeah, that's one thing you want to be careful about, not going over the edges when we are coloring. Okay, I think that should be better. Oh, maybe down here. But the nice thing is it's very easy to edit this because I have the file right here. You can make some edits and then I'll just export and replace. So download to the same place. I'll click on the files to add the same file name and click save and click replace. And when I go back to Godot, you can see it already updated it. So that edge is now gone. Okay, so if I keep drawing in a line, it just adds to the line. If I draw an edge up here, it goes up here. If I add a box right here, okay, so here we see another part where I went over, so I'll have to fix that later. And then I can keep adding. Oh, you can see I definitely made went way over the lines in a lot of places. So that's something to keep in mind. I need to clean up a bunch of these things, but I can do that later. So anyway, I can keep drawing around so I can make some different tiles. You can see there's some of my flowers if I have a certain type of thing. If I draw around something like that, I'm gonna get some flowers. And so I have a lot of like edges that look bad that I would need to fix. And then the other thing that I need is I can't fill in water. So I do need a separate tile to fill in my water. And I can do that. I'll go back to my tile set and I'll just grab this and I can grab a tile here. And so this is a little tricky, but what I'm going to do is put a tile on top of a tile. I don't really recommend this. You should probably just export another image. Actually, let's just do that because that's a better way to do it. So I'm going to go back to Pascal. And what I want to do is just export something that is this size that's blue. So actually, the easiest thing to do, I'm just going to copy this color. Copy that, make a new Pascal, make sure that it's 64 by 64, and paste in the color value here. So I get that same blue, and I'm going to paste that and save it as water tile So if I was smart, I would have made this part of my tile set, but I forgot to do that. And so now I'm just going to export, download. And so this is my tile auto water tile. So I'll go back to Godot and drag this in here and just do a single tile and grab that. And I can put a collision on there. So that's pretty easy to do. I'll just grab a box, put the box on there. And now I can go back to my tile map, and now I have my water tile, so I can fill in any areas that I just want to be water. And so now I can switch, let's name that tile to be thorough. So that's going to be called water. And so now I can make, my auto tile and continue building out my world as big as I want. And you can also start to see why this is better for top down or 2D. Like if I was going on top of these things, that would make sense. Or if I'm top down, I'm just like walking around, it makes sense. But if I'm, if it's supposed to be like perspective, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I need to add in some shading or some different effects to make that look better.
Is this the same process that we would use for
what?
For side scrolling?
Yeah, you could. So if you were doing a side scroller, you might want to do like a slightly different map. So let me hide this and duplicate it. So for a side scroller, like if I, oops, I'm going to delete this. So, in a side scroller, I might have like a platform like this, like a big platform that I'm standing on, something like that to start. And then instead of this being water, this might just be like the sky or whatever. And so I could like jump onto this platform, and then I could have another platform over here that I have to jump onto. So you may want to adjust the art to look a little bit different to imply different scenery. So like if this is the sky, instead of the water, I might want to put clouds. I might want to change, these bottom tiles. So maybe it doesn't have water at the bottom. Maybe these just like go all the way through the blue part. But I could do either setup with this. Like I could have this be, the tiles that I jump on, and the blue part is just the sky. Or I could have it be a top down and I'm building out like a map. Does that make sense?
Yes. So, but I could do it like that because I personally wanted to do a side scroller.
Yeah.
And so if I just do it like that in like a linear way, it would work. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, you can use it for either. That's actually a good thing to bring up though, because if you were doing a side scroller, you would have the opposite colliders. So for example, if we go back to the other scene that I had set up, the tile simple scene. Where's that? So for this one, the colliders actually have to be part of the art. So let me actually, let's see. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save this tile set. This is a good thing to go over anyway. So if I want to use this tile set somewhere else, I created this tile set, but if I don't save it, it doesn't really like exist anywhere. It's just sort of in Godot's memory. So if I want to use it somewhere else, what I can do is I can go here and I can say save. And I'm going to say Autotile 3x3, and it's going to save it as a TRES file. And so I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a new folder for this one, since it is a different type of data. So where do I do that? Create folder. I'm going to call this tile sets. And so this is Autotile 3x3. I'm going to save that. So now I have this tile set, Autotile 3x3. So now I can use that in different tile maps and different scenes. And so if I was adding it to this scene where I have added in my player physics, I'm going to increase the player speed a little bit. So I would have to do the opposite of the colliders that I did for the map scene. So if I add in a tile map here, I'm going to click create. And I'm going to click on here. And what I'm going to do, I'm not going to load this because I don't want to overwrite it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to say 3x3 platforms. And so now I have a separate one that I can edit. So I'm going to go to the tile set. Instead of creating a new one, I'm going to load and go to tile sets, 3x3 platforms. Okay, so now I have this in here, but I can change it. So I'm going to click on it to open the tile editor and go back here. And so remember, I'm going to click on the arrow. And remember, we created these collisions that block out the water. So the player can only walk on the green. So for a platformer, we actually want the player to stand on the green. So I'm going to delete these collisions. And I'm just going to do a couple for an example. So I'll come down to this tile and I'll do a collision here, but I need to make it smaller. So I'm going to change the step again to 16 by 16. And let's zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to bring this down like this. So it's not exact, but for the demo, it's close enough. And then I'll do the same thing here. I'll make just a couple of simple examples. So I'll do a collision like that and a collision. One thing that's tricky is you have to click on this little box every time you want to make a new collision. And another collision that goes like this. Okay. So I haven't done all of the colliders, but if I want to walk on the green, I have to have the colliders there. So I think there'll still be enough to demonstrate. I'm going to go back to my map and I'll put this down here. So it's pretty...
You can walk on the green even though there's a collider on it?
Well, so yeah, that's a good thing to like. So colliders basically prevent you from going through something. And so in a platformer style game, let me just do a quick drawing. In a platformer style game, if your character is falling, which we haven't talked about this yet because we haven't gone over gravity, but we have gravity on this player here. If the character is falling, then we want a platform that has a collider to stop the player so they don't keep falling through. And then part of the challenge in a platformer is that once the player gets here, they're going to jump over here. And if they miss the platform, they're going to keep falling. So we want to put the collider inside here. It's a little bit different if we're doing like an RPG style game where you might have like a map. So you might have something like, let's go to this scene. So if you had something like this, although I was kind of drawing this as though it was like a 2D scene, but that's okay. So in this case, you know, your player might be in here and you want to walk around. So you don't want to block the player from walking around, but you do want to block the player from walking in the water. So then you put the colliders here. So that's actually a good question and a good thing to consider, the different use of colliders in different cases in different styles of games. So let's look at what that actually looks like. I think this will work in this scene. So I have this little dot here and I have this guy here and they have colliders on them. So if I'm good enough to actually land on them, we should see that they work. Okay, so yeah, see, I can walk on that, but if I fall off, I'm just gonna fall forever. And if I can do this, I can go on here. So with gravity, with a 2D side scroller, the collider is going to keep me from falling through. But with an RPG style game with a map, the collider is going to prevent me from, you know, walking into areas that I'm not supposed to go into, or walls or things like that. So it has the same functionality. It prevents one thing from passing through another, but in different contexts, it's used for different things. So that's a really good question to consider.
So what is the difference between the character standing on the collider?
The difference is, so the player that I added in this scene has gravity. And that's something that is in the default player controller, but it's not something that we've actually gone over in class yet. So this player has gravity, which makes it fall. So like, for example, if I take the player and, whoops, is the player locked? No, I'll just use the transform.
I mean, like the difference between the platform that it's standing on now and the platform that you have the collider on. What's the difference? Don't they both prevent it from falling?
Oh, you mean like this tile map, like this one?
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, this one also has a collider on it. So
okay.
Yeah, if we go here, you can see that yellow box is the collider that I added on here. So they're both they're both using colliders.
And this may be getting ahead, but then how do you I guess put something in so that if the player does fall that they actually like die or have to start over?
That's a good question. There's a couple different ways to do that. I'm trying to think. You could, so one thing that you could do is just write it into the code. So I could say something like, if I grab the player and I take this player controller, so this actually has it in here already, but it doesn't do anything because we haven't written this other code. But you can see this code here. It says if the player is alive and the position of the player goes below 2 times the size of the game window. So we haven't talked about this, and we will soon. It's going to kill the player, but we haven't set up the rest of this stuff to actually do anything. What we could do is just reset the player position. So just for example, I'll comment out that code, and I'll just say player.position.y equals -100. Or actually, I'm in the player, so I just need position.y. So I think it should work. If I fall off, it'll just reset me. Oh, but I have to, yeah, go like that. So you can do it with code. Another thing that I could do is add like an invisible box down here. And this is something we're actually going to talk about next week when we go over rewards. But normally what you would do is add something called a area 2D. And I might call this like, you know, dead zone or something like that. And I would move it down here and add in a collider. So I could add in a collision shape and make it a rectangle. And then just like make it really, really big. And we don't know how to do this yet, but once I had set this up, I would basically say like, if the player hits this, then, you know, the player dies or restart the scene or something like that. But this is something that we'll cover soon. So yeah, we'll see other ways to do that.
Okay, and then I assume you just code in a better spawn location to avoid that like loop that it had a fall.
Yeah. So if I wanted to reset the player better, I would probably say y equals 0 and position.x equals 0. So then it'll go to a specific place instead of like looping around.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. And maybe I want to set it up like so it falls in again. I don't know. There's like a million ways you can do it in a lot of different ways. It just depends on what you want it to look like. You could do it like that too. Cool. So yeah, I hope that's useful introduction to tile maps. Oh, I see it's actually sorry, it took me longer than I expected, but that's okay. Let me stop the recording.